Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Diep sealed her very first vegetable order with a price that felt unreal. The supplier named the number, and for a split second she thought she misheard. The margin looked too good in a way that made her excited and suspicious. Still, Diep didn't hesitate. She kept her face calm, confirmed the quantity, confirmed the delivery time, and ended the call like this was just another deal. But the moment she put her phone down, reality hit. Vegetables aren't like fruit. With fruit, you have some breathing room. With leafy greens and roots, freshness is a timer that starts counting down the second the produce leaves the farm. If the cold chain breaks, even a little, the product doesn't fail loudly, it just quietly collapses. Leaves soften, color dulls, value disappears. That's why Diep made one move immediately. She pulled James into the delivery. Not because she couldn't do it alone, but because she wanted this first run airtight. She wanted a second set of eyes, someone to handle problems on the road, someone who could stand beside her at the market if buyers played rough. And honestly, she wanted James to feel the pressure she carries every day, the kind you can't explain over dinner. James stared at her like she'd asked him to join a circus. "Deliver vegetables? At dawn?" he repeated. Diep didn't laugh. "Yes, I'm not risking my first order. Come with me, just this time." James wanted to argue. He had work, responsibilities, but he remembered how rare these moments were, how often he chose work by default. So he swallowed his complaint and agreed, telling himself it was one early morning, one trip, then back to normal. That night, Diep slept like someone waiting for an exam. She set alarms, checked messages, rechecked the numbers, purchase price, selling price, fuel, fees. If everything went clean, she'd earn more than she expected. If it went wrong, she'd lose money and, worse, lose credibility. Before sunrise, they were already on the road. The air was cold and sharp, the streets mostly empty. James sat quiet, still half asleep. Diep, though, looked fully awake, hair tied back, phone in hand, eyes on the clock. At the pickup point, farmers were already working under dim lights. Crates scraped across the ground. Plastic bags rustled. Bundles of greens and boxes of vegetables sat ready, still holding the coolness of the night. Diep checked the produce quickly but carefully. Firm leaves, clean stems, no yellowing, no bruised spots. For the first time in hours, her chest loosened. "This is good," she murmured. Then she looked up. The refrigerated truck was supposed to be there. At first she stayed calm. 5 minutes late happens. 10 minutes happens. But time kept moving. 15, 20, 30. The farmers were watching. Workers were waiting. And Diep's stomach started tightening again. She called the driver. No answer. She called. Again, still nothing. James leaned against the car, arms crossed. "Maybe traffic?" Diep cut him off. "Traffic doesn't matter. These can't sit like this." Finally, headlights bounced down the road and the truck rolled into view. Diep's relief lasted about 2 seconds, long enough to notice the driver's stressed face and the way the truck sounded weak. "Sorry," the driver said immediately. "Problem on the way." Diep walked straight to the back doors and placed her hand near the metal. She expected that sharp, cold feeling, the kind that tells you the unit is doing its job. Nothing. Her heart dropped. "Open it." The driver hesitated. "It's running. Open it." The doors swung wide, and the air inside was wrong. Not warm, but not properly cold either. Exactly the kind of in-between temperature that kills vegetables fast. Diep climbed up, touched the boxes. Damp plastic. a faint, sweaty smell. She lifted a corner and pressed the leaves with her fingers. They were already losing crispness. James's voice tightened. "Why isn't it cold?" The driver shrugged, hoping the problem would disappear if he acted casual. "The unit is acting up. I'll turn it stronger on the road." Diep stared at him. "We're already late." For a second, she wanted to call it off. But what was the alternative? Take everything back, eat the loss, and walk away branded as unreliable on day one? She had no clean exit. So they loaded the vegetables anyway. Diep became laser-focused. She made James check the stacking. She told the driver to keep the doors shut, not to stop, not to waste time. Her voice was controlled, but panic sat underneath. The truck pulled out. Diep and James followed behind, the sky slowly turning gray. On the road, Diep tried to talk herself down. Maybe the market wasn't far. Maybe the unit would stabilize. Maybe the vegetables would still pass inspection. But by the time they reached the city, daylight was breaking and her hope was thinning. The wholesale market hit them like a wall of noise. Trucks lined up. Workers shouted. Buyers moved fast, scanning goods with eyes that missed nothing. This place didn't care how hard you tried. It cared what you delivered. Diep forced on a professional face and walked straight to the buyer she'd arranged. "Goods are here," she said. The buyer barely looked at her. He waved a hand. "Open." The doors swung again. The buyer climbed up, pulled a box forward, and flipped the lid. Diep held her breath. The vegetables weren't completely ruined, but they looked tired. Leaves drooped instead of standing proud. Color dulled. The shine of freshness was gone. To an average person, it might still look okay. To a wholesale buyer, it was a signal. Risk. The buyer's expression hardened. "This is not top quality," he said. Diep jumped in fast. "It was fresh at pickup. The truck," he cut her off. "Not my problem. I can't pay full." Diep's throat went dry. "We agreed on the price." The buyer let out a short laugh. "That price is for fresh. This? I'll take it, but not at that price." He held up 3 fingers. "1/3, he said. "Take it or take it back." Diep froze. 1/3 meant she wasn't just losing profit. She was losing money. Fuel, handling, time, everything. And worse, she was losing face in the busiest place possible, surrounded by people who would remember her as the newcomer who delivered weak goods. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Can we meet in the middle? Even a little?" The buyer shrugged. "I'm already being generous taking it." And right then, another voice slid into the moment. Sweet, slow, and sharp. "Oh, wow," the voice said. "First vegetable delivery? And it already looks like this?" Diep turned her head. Vi was standing there, perfectly composed, eyes bright with amusement, like she'd arrived on purpose to watch Diep fall. Vi didn't just appear. She arrived like someone who knew exactly where to stand so everyone could see her. She angled her body towards the open truck, leaned in slightly, and let her gaze sweep over the drooping greens as if she were inspecting a failed performance. "Such a good price, right?" Vi said, voice light but loaded. "Too bad the quality doesn't match." Diep's face tightened. She could feel the eyes around them shift. Workers, nearby buyers, other sellers. In a wholesale market, gossip travels faster than any truck. One scene like this could become a label that sticks. Diep forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Vi, I didn't know you were here." Vi smiled back like a knife wrapped in silk. "I come here all the time. You know, serious people do." James's jaw moved like he was biting back a comment. He wasn't sure who Vi was in full detail, but he could read the energy instantly. This wasn't concern. This was a public dunk. Diep tried to ignore her and turned back to the buyer. 1/3 is too low. At least give me. The buyer lifted a hand, bored. Either accept it or move the truck. I have other people waiting. Diep stood there, heart pounding. The cold chain had failed them, and now she was being punished for it. She calculated quickly. If she took the goods back, she'd still have to pay transport, storage, and the vegetables would only get worse. Selling at 1/3 was humiliating, but it would stop the bleeding. She swallowed hard. Fine. The buyer's face didn't change. He signaled his workers. Money exchanged hands, far less than Diep had planned. Crates began moving off the truck fast, like the market was erasing her mistake in real time. Diep watched her first big step get chopped down to a fraction of what it was supposed to be. The loss wasn't only financial, it was psychological. This was her first order, her first impression, and it was happening under fluorescent lights and strangers' stares. Vi clucked her tongue. That's rough. And you were so confident yesterday, too. Diep snapped her gaze toward her. What do you want, Vi? Vi lifted her shoulders innocently. Nothing. I'm just surprised. Usually, people learn about cold chain logistics before they jump in. She said it like a lesson, but her eyes were laughing. Vegetables are sensitive. It's not like fruit. James finally stepped forward. Enough. Vi's eyes slid to him. She looked him up and down, then smiled wider, as if she'd just found a new button to press. Oh, you brought your husband? She asked, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. So sweet, but does he know what he's doing? Or is he just here for decoration? James's face flushed. Diep shot him a warning look, not because she agreed with Vi, but because she couldn't afford a scene. Not here, not now. But James had already crossed his line. He'd woken up before dawn. He'd come here instead of going to work. He'd watched a deal collapse and still tried to support Diep. And now he was being talked about like he was nothing. Diep turned away from Vi and moved toward the truck side, hands trembling as she gripped a strap. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. This happened because the truck wasn't cold, she said, more to James than anyone. If you had pushed harder, checked earlier, maybe we could have stopped it. James stared at her, stunned. Me? Diep's frustration erupted. Yes, you. You keep acting like this is some little outing. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. If I fail, it's not just money, it's reputation. It's everything. James took a step back like she slapped him. I don't understand pressure. Diep, I skipped work for this. I came with you at dawn. I stood here while you got humiliated. And now you're blaming me like I'm the reason your truck broke? Diep's eyes flashed. If you were really on my side, you'd feel how serious this is, instead of standing there like you're visiting. James's voice rose. I'm not a visitor. I'm your husband. But you talk to me like I'm an outsider the moment things go wrong. Their argument pulled attention like a magnet. Nearby workers slowed down. Someone pretended to check a crate while clearly listening. In a crowded market, privacy doesn't exist. Diep felt the stares and hated herself for letting the fight spill out here. But she couldn't stop. The loss was burning through her chest, and the embarrassment made her reckless. James pointed toward the emptying truck. What do you want from me, Diep? You want me to control the driver? Fix the refrigeration unit? I can't. Diep's voice cracked. Then don't act like you're sacrificing so much when you can't even help. James went quiet. His eyes hardened. That's what you think? That I'm useless here? Diep opened her mouth, then stopped, because the truth was messier. She didn't think he was useless. She thought she was alone. And when she felt alone, she attacked the closest person who cared enough to stand beside her. Vi watched the entire exchange with obvious satisfaction, like she'd ordered a show and it delivered. She didn't even need to say anything else. Her smile did it for her. The buyer's workers finished unloading. The last crate disappeared into the sea of stalls. The truck was suddenly empty, and the emptiness felt like a verdict. Diep looked at the money in her hand. Thin, insulting. Her first order, her first great deal, reduced to a lesson that cost her pride. James inhaled slowly, trying to calm himself. "Let's go," he said. "Quieter now. We'll talk later." Diep didn't answer. She couldn't. If she spoke, it would either be another accusation or a breakdown. They walked away from the stall, past piles of produce and shouting vendors, carrying the weight of what just happened. Diep's phone buzzed once, then again. She ignored it. She couldn't handle more bad news. But the universe didn't wait for her to catch her breath. As they reached the edge of the market, a familiar older voice called her name. "Diep." Diep turned. Tu hurried toward her, face tense, eyes sharp with urgency. He wasn't smiling, and Tu was the type who always tried to smile first. Diep's stomach dropped. "What happened?" Tu looked around quickly, lowering his voice. "I just heard something. Not sure how far it's spread yet, but it's already moving." Diep's throat tightened. "Heard what?" Tu hesitated like he didn't want to be the one to say it, then forced the words out. "There's a rumor going around in the area," he said. "People are saying you're not trustworthy, that you do business and you owe money, that you're in debt." Diep went completely still. For a second, the market noise faded, like someone turned down the volume on the world. Her fingers went cold. Her stomach hollowed out. Because one bad delivery is an accident. A rumor like that isn't an accident. Not this fast. Not this specific. James frowned. "Who's saying that?" Tu shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I know what this kind of talk does. It poisons deals before they start. Farmers won't want to supply you. Buyers won't want to pay you up front. Everyone becomes cautious." Diep's lips parted, but no sound came out. She could still see the buyer's face, still hear 1/3. That had been humiliation. This was something worse. This was sabotage. Her mind snapped back to the refrigerated truck. Late, not cold, acting up. The timing. The failure at the worst possible moment. Vi appearing right when she was exposed. Vi's smug comments about cold chain logistics like she'd been waiting to deliver them. A cold realization settled into Diep's chest. This wasn't just bad luck. This was targeted. Diep's eyes drifted back toward the market entrance, where people moved like ants. Busy, anonymous, unstoppable. Somewhere in that crowd was the source of the whisper campaign, the person pushing her name into dirt with a few well-placed words. James looked at Diep, and for the first time since their argument, his anger faltered. Her expression wasn't frustration now. It was shock. The kind that comes when you realize the game you're playing just got darker. "Diep," James said carefully, "are you okay?" Diep didn't answer right away. She couldn't. Her mind was racing through possibilities. Who benefits? Who's threatened? Who has access? And the hardest question of all, How many people had already heard it? Tu touched her arm gently. Listen to me. Don't panic in public. Go home first. We'll figure it out. But you need to be smart. This kind of rumor spreads because it's easy to repeat. Diep finally swallowed, forcing air into her lungs. Her voice came out low, almost hollow. They're trying to destroy me, she whispered. James's face tightened. Who? Diep's eyes lifted, and for a moment they were sharp, hurt, furious, and suddenly awake to a new reality. I don't know yet, she said, but this isn't a mistake. Someone wants me to fail. And that's where the day truly ends. Not with a lost deal, not with an argument, but with Diep standing in the middle of a noisy market, realizing she's no longer fighting spoilage